European colonialism carved its name into history with a blade of violence, greed, and relentless ambition. Beneath the grand promises of progress and civilization lay an abyss of suffering. Powerful nations, intoxicated by their hunger for wealth and dominance, stretched their hands across continents, justifying their conquest with hollow words. But what was the true cost? The echoes of this past still ripple through the world today, shaping lives in ways we often fail to recognize. Even now, can you see the scars? Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on the notification button. Gifts and tokens are also highly appreciated as we operate independently and would love to keep bringing the truth to you. The exploitation of resources, the erasure of identities, the perpetual cycles of violence, these are the ghosts of colonialism, whispering through time. Perhaps one of the darkest chapters of this tragic saga was the Atlantic slave trade, a horror deserving its own grim recounting. Step into the late 19th century. King Leopold II of Belgium stands before the world as a so-called benefactor of Central Africa, promising to modernize and uplift the land. But behind this facade lurks a predator. He does not bring civilization, he brings chains. Ivory, rubber, and timber are his currency, and human lives are the price. As the demand for rubber surges, driven by the explosion of bicycle and automobile production, the Congolese are shackled into forced labor. Imagine their torment, families held hostage, men pushed beyond their limits, and the ever-present threat of the whip. Fail to meet quotas? Flogging. Try to flee? Pursued into the forests like prey. Resist? Mutilation or death at the hands of Leopold's private army, the Force Publique. This brutal regime was enforced with an unspeakable cruelty. Soldiers were ordered to collect severed hands as proof of their executions. Picture this horror, a land bathed in blood, echoing with the cries of the helpless. It was not until the world gasped in outrage that the Belgian government seized control in 1908. But by then, Leopold had hoarded unimaginable wealth, between $100 million and $500 million, while up to 10 million souls had perished. Across the seas in British-ruled India, famine loomed like a specter. British policies turned natural disasters into catastrophic death sentences. Picture the barren fields of Bengal in 1943, where skeletal figures collapsed from hunger while British authorities continued exporting rice. What do you see? Starvation, desperation, up to 3.5 million lives lost, not to war, but to neglect. Meanwhile, in the heart of the Aztec Empire, the Spanish arrived not as explorers, but as conquerors. Hernán Cortés did not seek friendship, he sought dominion. In 1519, he marched upon Cholula, a city steeped in rich culture and history. But what happened next was not diplomacy, it was slaughter. Can you hear the clash of swords, the desperate screams? Within hours, thousands lay dead. Some say 3,000 perished. Others claim the death toll reached a staggering 30,000. The air reeked of blood and betrayal. And then there was Tenochtitlan, the jewel of the Aztec civilization. Montezuma, the great emperor, greeted the Spaniards with open arms, perhaps believing them to be divine. But his fate was sealed the moment he welcomed Cortés. Within days, the Spanish had seized him, forcing him to kneel before their foreign crown. The once mighty leader, now a puppet, watched as his empire crumbled. Starvation, smallpox, merciless warfare. By the time the dust settled in 1521, Tenochtitlan was no more. Imagine the weeping of its people, the rivers choked with bodies, the sky thick with smoke, a civilization reduced to ruins. This was not the only land to be drowned in blood. The Second Boer War, 1899 to 1902, saw British forces round up Boer civilians and imprison them in hellish concentration camps. Imagine being torn from your home, locked behind barbed wire, watching as disease and starvation claimed thousands. By war's end, nearly 27,000 Boers had perished, alongside up to 20,000 black Africans. This was not war, it was systematic suffering. Half a world away in British Kenya, the colonial government's answer to the Mau Mau uprising was pure, unfiltered brutality. Men and women, young and old, were dragged to detention camps where nightmares became reality. Beatings, torture, rape, executions. The official records speak of 11,000 deaths, but others whisper of a darker truth: 90,000 Kenyans executed, tortured, or maimed. Can you grasp the magnitude of such cruelty? Can you hear their cries for justice, still lingering in the winds of history? And the Incas, once rulers of a vast empire, fell victim to Spanish steel. Pizarro's deception lured Atahualpa into a fatal trap. Imagine standing in the square of Cajamarca, where 80,000 Incan warriors outnumber the Spanish. Yet in a matter of moments, the battlefield turns red with their blood. 7,000 Incas slain without inflicting a single casualty on the Spanish. Atahualpa, the mighty emperor, is held captive. His people gather mountains of gold and silver to secure his release, only to watch him strangled to death. Their empire crumbles. The once thriving Andes become a land of sorrow, where disease and war claim up to 90% of the population. The British conquest of Australia, too, was marked by relentless bloodshed. At first, there was a fragile peace, but as settlers spread like an unstoppable tide, the indigenous people were left with nowhere to run. Massacres swept through the land: Waterloo Creek, Mile Creek, Portland. Aboriginal communities were decimated, their populations reduced by 90% through violence and disease. Even children were not spared. Torn from their families, forced into European homes, they lost their names, their languages, their very identities. They became the stolen generations, robbed of their heritage by a government that sought to erase them. And then there was Algeria. The French arrived, and the Algerians resisted. The people of Sétif and Guelma marched for their independence in 1945, only to be met with a storm of bullets. Imagine the streets slick with blood, the air filled with screams. Some say 15,000 died. Others claim the death toll reached 45,000. The uprising did not end there. The Algerian War of Independence, 1954 to 1962, saw the French unleash a reign of terror: bombings, torture, mass executions. One French general admitted that few prisoners survived a single night of interrogation. By war's end, the Algerian death toll ranged from 90,000 to 1.5 million. And what of Haiti? The French enslaved its people, but the Haitians fought back. Led by Toussaint Louverture, they tore through the chains of oppression. But the French did not surrender quietly. They deployed a ship designed for mass murder, pumping toxic fumes into its hull to suffocate captives en masse. And yet, in 1804, Haiti emerged victorious, though at a staggering cost: 400,000 lives lost to a revolution born of fire and fury. Germany once owned significant land in Africa, including what is now Namibia, then known as Southwest Africa. Following the Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885, Germany took control of Namibia, negotiated its borders with Portuguese-controlled Angola, and made arrangements with Britain for access to the Zambezi River. In 1890, Germans began seizing land and cattle from the local Herero and Nama peoples, leading to uprisings in the 1890s and early 1900s. In 1903, a battle between German troops and local groups occurred. A Nama chief was killed in a dispute over a goat, and by early 1904, 100 Germans had been killed by African troops. Initially, the Africans had more soldiers, but by August, the Germans gained the upper hand. Germany then forcibly moved the Herero and Nama groups to reservations and camps over the next 2 years. Many prisoners of war were used as slave labor to build railways, docks, and buildings throughout the country. Germany issued orders to kill everyone, as explained by Lieutenant General Lothar von Trotha, who was in charge of the colonies. The Herero people were to leave the country. If they refused, they would be forced out with cannons. Within German boundaries, every Herero, armed or unarmed, with or without cattle, was to be shot. Women and children would no longer be accommodated and would be driven back to their people or shot. The conflict between Germany and the Nama continued until 1907, resulting in the deaths of 65,000 to 80,000 Herero and around 10,000 Nama, which was about 80% of their total population. Dutch East Indies, 1945 to 1949. In the 1600s, the Dutch trade empire included the islands of Sumatra, Java, and parts of Borneo, known as the Dutch East Indies. The Dutch East India Company, established in 1602, controlled the spice trade between the Indian and Pacific Oceans. The British East India Company, founded in 1600, was a major rival. By 1619, the VOC had set up its headquarters in Batavia, now Jakarta. The company controlled trade until it went bankrupt in 1799, after which the Dutch government took over and renamed the islands the Dutch East Indies. Through the 18th, 19th, and early 20th centuries, the Dutch controlled the East Indies until Japan occupied them during World War II. After the war, the Dutch East Indies sought independence, leading to a conflict. In 1945, the Dutch East Indies, which would later become Indonesia, declared its independence. However, the Dutch and other Allied powers did not recognize this, leading to military intervention. Between 1945 and 1946, battles demonstrated the strength and dedication of the Indonesian military. Several peace attempts were made, but when talks broke down in 1947, the Dutch launched military actions. In 2 months, they killed about 4,000 Indonesians using tactics known as the Westerling method. This involved surrounding villages, searching residents, and executing suspects. The worst retaliations occurred during the Dutch police actions in 1947, when 120,000 troops were sent to Indonesia. Indonesia gained independence in 1949, but the exact number of casualties remains unknown. The Dutch suffered about 6,000 deaths directly related to the war. Irish potato famine, 1846 to 1852. During the Irish potato famine in the mid-1800s, approximately 1 million people, or up to 25% of the Irish population, died from hunger or illness. Another 1 million people left Ireland or were forced out. Although the famine was not directly caused by the British Empire, British policies exacerbated the situation. Ireland was part of the British Empire at the time. When the potato blight appeared in 1845, England initially did little to help. Potatoes were the primary food source in Ireland. The blight, caused by a plant pathogen, led to crop failures, depriving the Irish of food, cattle feed, and export goods. Queen Victoria repealed the Corn Laws, which had made grain and corn more expensive than potatoes. However, the grain and corn shipped to Ireland were often unaffordable and unfamiliar to the population. Many were evicted from their homes due to poverty, leading to the establishment of charity houses and workhouses. Throughout the famine, Ireland continued to export goods, feeding people worldwide at the expense of its own population. The British government adopted a laissez-faire approach, waiting for economic and social problems to resolve themselves. Aid programs like soup kitchens were eventually discontinued. Amritsar Massacre, 1919. With the establishment of the British Raj in 1858, the British Empire took direct control of India. By the late 1800s and early 1900s, a Governor-General or Viceroy was appointed in Calcutta to govern India from London. Indians were hired for lower-level government jobs, but the rise of Indian nationalism and the increasing cost of running the empire led to more Indians seeking control over their lives after World War I. This is just a fragment of colonialism's dark legacy. Its echoes linger in our world today, shaping economies, politics, and cultures. The question remains, have we truly learned from the past? Or do the shadows of empire still loom over us, waiting for history to repeat itself?